What's up, everybody? Welcome to 242's first ever real live stream. Yes, we are actually live right now, coming to you from, well, this is actually my garage. It may be hard to believe, but it is actually my garage, and we are really excited tonight that you are joining us. We are here for a panel, but really it's more of a conversation about mental health and about our emotions and anxiety and depression. You and I are dealing with things we've never had to deal with before. This is the first time ever, I'm guessing, that you have ever been quarantined in your house. I know that it's the first time I have ever been told by my mayor and by my boss, hey, you need to stay home and work from your garage. And so we're figuring things out, and there's social isolation and distancing and all of this stuff that's going on. And even before that, life was just stressful. If you're in school, if you're working, and especially now if you're back home with your parents and you're trying to figure out a new reality, life can just be a bit overwhelming at times. And so we wanted to gather together tonight for 242, and we wanted to talk about some of this reality. And I'm really excited today to have some friends join us on this stream. We actually have a panel of, well, we'll call them professionals because they are, and we're excited to have three different people with us. We have Megan Culpepper, Brandon Carlson, and Brittany Kottman, but really she goes by BK, and so we're just going to call her BK the rest of the night, because if I try to remember to call her Brittany, I will just mess up because she goes by BK. But we're just going to take a few minutes and introduce each of them so that you get to know them and you know who they are. And so first, Megan, take it away. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, awesome. So I'm Megan. I am a licensed professional counselor. I actually work at Texas A&M with college students doing mental health counseling. But more about me, I am married and I have 4 kids. I have 4 kids under the age of 6. And so being a full-time working mom and being a wife is a lot at times, but I'm excited to be here with y'all. So I did my undergrad at East Texas Baptist University and my master's degree at Texas State. So that is a little bit about me.
Nice.
And also forgot the important part. So my involvement at Brazos Fellowship, I've served in the kids ministry, taught kindergarten, Sunday school a little bit, and my husband's also on staff there and been attending Brazos for, at least 6 years. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Yes. So your husband is Brad, one of my dear friends. He does video and all things tech for us, and we love him very much. You said you have how many kids under 6?
4.
4 kids under 6. Like, that is mind blowing.
Yep.
I have 2 kids under 5, and oh my gosh, like, twice as many. I can't even imagine. Okay. Hey, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, Megan. Okay, Brandon,
of course,
take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, y'all have set the bar high on the kid level. I'm going to have to drop it back down here. We have 2 miniature dachshunds here at the house, but they're a handful enough for us. But howdy, everyone. My name is Brandon Carlson. I'm a coordinator of residence life at Texas A&M University. I actually have the privilege of working with Megan and her team pretty frequently, but specifically I manage one half of our residence hall communities on the north side of campus in Hullabaloo Hall. So as you can imagine, it's stressful for us, as many of our students have made the decision to go home for the remainder of the semester, which is tough. As student affairs folks, we love to be helping our students, but I'm so glad to have the opportunity tonight to be helping virtually. A little bit about me. I'm married. My wife, Taylor, actually works at Brazos Fellowship. She is the Care Network coordinator there on staff, and she's been there since September of this past year. And so that's been really great. I also have helped with some different things within the church. Most notably, I've been working with Starting Point as an instructor for that ministry over the course of the last couple of years. So that's been something that I've really enjoyed. But I've been at Brazos Fellowship for 10 years now. So I remember the humble roots in which the church has come from back in the day. So that's been really fun to watch us grow and develop. A little bit about me. I did my undergraduate work at the University of the Ozarks. I was a history and social science double major. with a secondary education minor. And then I came to Texas A&M to pursue my master's degree in higher education with a specialization in student affairs. So working with students, helping them through their development here at the Texas A&M campus is something that I've really enjoyed over the course of the last few years.
That's awesome. Thank you, Brandon. You said you had a double major and a minor. Like, why would you torture yourself like that?
I asked myself that many times, Chris, actually, when I was, getting up in the morning to go drive 20 minutes to teach high school students and also write my thesis. But I survived. And you can too if you're watching this tonight.
Yeah, really.
You can make it, I promise.
There you go. If you take nothing else away, you can survive a double major and a minor while teaching high school students. Okay, so that leaves us with BK. BK, tell us a little bit about who you are. If people watching don't know, who is Brittany Kottman?
I just Brittany is the only time people call me Brittany is at work. So I have to put on my professional face, and not say bleh. But so I work for A&M also. I think that's cool. All of us work for A&M. High fives all around. Or thumbs up. Sorry, Dave. I'm sorry. So I work for A&M at AgriLife Extension, and we have a department called Distance Education, and basically we just house all of the online courses on our platform. And so I am the help desk person for that. So I get lots of varying questions throughout my day. It's very fun. I'm also the only one who answers calls. So if you ever call up there, it's me. I have been at Bradley Fellowship for, I want to say 4 years now, 3 years, going on 3 years. And I came here just trying to find a church home. And I ended up, the first day I showed up, I was like, and this is my place. I love it here. It was cool because I ended up reaching out to Dawson, and I lead worship. I help lead worship with all the peeps that are up there every Sunday. Missing it a lot right now. I hate not being up there. And I found my people here. One person who's inside is my fiance. So he plays the drums with us, and it's really cool. I just got engaged in February, and none of that would be possible without my church. So
I love it. I'm so glad that you mentioned Mason and your new engagement. I was going to bring it up if you didn't. So, well, thank y'all very much for joining us tonight to have this conversation. And honestly, if we are going to jump into a conversation about mental health and anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, I want your opinion, first of all. Why is there such a stigma in the church attached to this conversation? Because I got to be honest, this is not a conversation that I have regularly had from the stage or in large groups, but it's a conversation that comes up all the time in one-on-one conversations and discussions. And so if it's so prevalent, why do you think it is such a hard thing to talk about? Brandon, you deal with students all the time. You are in charge of half of the residence halls on campus. And so I know you have this conversation a lot. Why do you think it is so hard to have this conversation in a larger group and on a larger scale?
Yeah, I think, it really starts with the societal pieces that surround mental health. I think, many times we have the stigma that's attached by what we see in the media and what's going on the internet, past just the church. The World Health Organization, looking at suicide rates alone, over 800,000 people commit suicide annually.
Wow.
And that is the second leading killer amongst folks ages 15 to 29 in the world. But yet it's not something that we're talking about. And I think, we have a great disservice in, many of these countries to where we have created these boundaries and barriers to talking about mental health. And I think that's something that unfortunately extends into the church as well. And I think many times, there's a perceived lack of trust in God or connection in your faith. If I'm not, a strong enough Christian, if I'm not as meaningful in my faith, and then obviously, I can't, talk through some of these things and be able to be transparent and authentic. And I think that's tough. I think the church's job is really to try to break down those barriers instead of, throwing up another one in the context of something that we have to overcome. And so I think that's why the conversation that we're having today is so important. because it's important for us to bring awareness and to make these types of conversations become normal. So that way, we have the chance to be able to help people and really reach out to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so BK, you have walked through this, and I know you wouldn't mind me sharing. That's why you're a part of this panel tonight. Like, you've walked through this. You walked through this being a part of the church, and I saw you shaking your head when Brandon talked about how we feel guilty or we feel less than if we're dealing with some of these things. So, like, what do you have to say about this idea of the stigma attached to this conversation in general?
Well, for me, I actually had something very similar, and I think along the same lines as you, Brandon, about how, it's this thing of whenever you get into a life with Jesus, everything's supposed to be okay. Everything's supposed to be fine, and you're supposed to have yourself together and just have faith and just get yourself up and pick yourself up by the bootstraps and all that kind of stuff. And I think that it just goes back to kind of this stigma of like everybody's happy whenever they're with Jesus. And I do think that, yes, that is true, but also you have those days when you can't get out of bed and that doesn't make you a bad Christian. That doesn't make you a bad person. And it doesn't mean that your relationship with Jesus is any less relevant or less important,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's powerful. And I think that's real. Like, that's so real that there is not only this perception, like in the church, that people are just like, well, if you really love Jesus, you wouldn't be dealing with this. Like, Jesus is enough. Megan, when you think about that idea, and you're thinking about it really from a professional standpoint, and I know you have all of this training, whatever, but how do you speak against that idea that if you had enough faith, you wouldn't be dealing with this? Like, where's the balance when it comes to God and medicine, God and professional help? Like, where does that balance fall?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of times we want to fall back on those practices, those spiritual practices that we've learned, maybe, most of our lives. Prayer, reading through the scripture, talking, worship, those kinds of things. And I think the balance comes in when we've tried those things and we're diligently pressing in to our faith and into our relationship with God, and we're not kind of experiencing change. Because I think sometimes we can get stuck and we can get into patterns of things that aren't necessarily going to come to light when we're sort of siloed in our own selves. And I think that's where the balance of seeking professional help can really start to add in that extra perspective, bring in someone else who's not in your thoughts, in your beliefs, and to either help validate those thoughts and feelings for you, like, that is true, or that is real, or maybe help you begin to question some of those in a way to where you're actually growing spiritually and growing in that change process. So we talk a lot about it in counseling as it's a process for change. And don't get me wrong, I believe in God as healer and God Absolutely. Of miracles. But sometimes it's the process that he's taking us through that's really part of why we may seek counseling. And in the medication piece too, we know that mental health conditions can be biological and genetic, that some of us might be predisposed to things like anxiety and depression, especially. So if we have family history of that, then there's a good chance that we may struggle with that. And it may be more mild all the way to more moderate or even severe. And medication can help with that biological component. And so it's not... I think of it as, let's say someone who does not have 20/20 vision, right? And they need corrective lenses. We wouldn't tell someone who's nearsighted or farsighted, well, just try harder or just pray about it or, something like that. And so I think that's where we can begin to kind of normalize anxiety or depression when we kind of think of it in a different, medical concern.
So good. So good. Brandon, how do you have that conversation with students? Because you see them kind of on a mass scale before they make that decision or have the courage to go and seek professional help and go talk to someone like Megan. So how do you begin to have that conversation, the whole separation of what you're allowed to talk about and not allowed to talk about? If they bring it up, and I know, Megan, you have to deal with that too, but Brandon, how do you have that conversation with someone that, hey, it's okay to seek professional help? I love it. Megan said earlier, like, we silo ourselves and we isolate internally and we convince ourselves we're the only one walking through this, or we're the only one feeling these things or thinking these things. And so how do you kind of get out in front of that and have that conversation with someone and help them see it's okay to go and open up and talk to somebody?
Yeah, no, I think it really comes down to, something that Mr. Rogers talked to us about a long time ago. When you're in crisis, you have to look for the helpers. My wife has that in her office, and I think it's so true. In situations where people are struggling, we have to be willing to normalize that. We have to be willing to have some honest conversations. And one of the things that I think we have to do is we have to be bold with our stories, and we have to be bold with our care. And I think that means reaching out. I think it means getting training. One of the things that A&M offers is a gatekeeper training for students and staff members to be able to recognize some of those early warning signs of mental health or depression or anxiety or stress. And so I think it starts with some of that. And then I think it's asking questions and being mindful of, how that person responds. And many times I think there's we don't want to send them to counseling, or we don't want to make them have to do something that they don't want to do. The reality is most of those people are looking for a lifeline.
Wow.
They want somebody to help. They want somebody to talk to. They want somebody to feel and to go through what they're feeling and going through. And I think that's something that's really profound in the work that I've been able to do. In my 10 years in student affairs, I've seen so many students that said, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. One of the greatest examples, I had a student who we actually confronted for an alcohol violation in one of our halls. He was drinking underage. And he went through our entire educational process and had sanctions that were issued to him, and had lots of conversations about what does this look like for you and why are you using alcohol. And about 6 months after the fact, he came to me and he said, if it wasn't for you, I would probably not be here, because I was using so much alcohol in my room on a daily basis that I had a problem. And because of the intervention of you actually documenting the situation and getting me some help and talking through what this is, I can graduate from this institution. I have a future, I have a career that I can go into. And I think that's one of the stories that will never leave me. It'll always stick. As kind of the purpose, the reason why we're here in this field is to be able to support students like that.
Wow. Man, that's powerful. Okay, so you talked about this gatekeeping training. It's important to see in other people, see what the signs are. I really want to hear from all three of you on this. How do you know when it's something that needs to be talked about? How do you know how can you see that in someone else, or see it in yourself? Like, hey, maybe something's not okay. Maybe something is off. Like, what are some of those symptoms or signs? I know it's easy. We know we have a cold when we get a sniffly nose or we start coughing or whatever. So what are some of those symptoms and signs to help us maybe self-identify that, hey, maybe it's time for us to have a conversation, or like that we see someone else and we know, hey, we need to speak into that?
I would say from my perspective, I'm sorry. I would say from my perspective, it really comes down to, building that relationship with that person. And so you start recognizing if they're withdrawing, if they're confused by things that normally they wouldn't be confused by, if they're not sleeping. And I know many times as college students, that's the first thing that goes is, taking care of yourself and resting and eating properly and getting exercise. But some of those things are warning signs that they may need some intervention, some help that's there. And so really at that point, it's kind of digging in and asking those questions. When was the last time that you did something to take care of yourself? How are you coping with this? How are you dealing dealing with the stress of being away from your family, or going through your academic course of study, the projects, the internship, the job search, all of these types of things. I think asking those really specific and intentional questions gives them an avenue to be able to really open up, and for you to get a better idea of what that looks like.
Yeah. BK, for you, where did that start? How did you start to know, man, maybe something's off? I'm not okay with where I'm at.
So my first thing is always to withdraw. Always. That's my first, is I don't want to see anyone. I don't want to talk to anyone. And I feel like that's pretty common across all boards. But whenever I really started to realize that something was wrong, is I did start using alcohol a lot. Like, I had never drank alcohol by myself, and it was at that time that I was starting to just go pick up beer for myself and sit in my room and watch Bob's Burgers and just close the door and I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't even look at my phone, that kind of thing. And that escalated into me not really caring about taking care of myself, the whole not sleeping that much, and I didn't really care what I ate. And for me, if you know me at all, I'm very emotional, and I could tell something was wrong because I wasn't feeling anything.
Wow.
I just didn't care. And that's very far out from who I am as a person. And then, obviously that led into me actually hurting myself. And so I think that that's another huge sign for people, is people were asking me what the cuts were from, but I was like, oh, we just got a cat, or something super. Wow. I would play it off, or I would wear a wrist brace and be like, oh, I popped my finger weird, and so my wrist hurts. So stuff like that, where I was it took a long time. It took about 3 months before anybody even said anything to me. So real life said something to me. So I think for me, that was the biggest thing, was I wish somebody would have asked me sooner, I guess, because I couldn't ask for that help at that point. I was too far into that dark spot where I was like, see, nobody even cares. Exactly my point. Nobody even cares. That kind of thing, which I hate to say now, because obviously so many people care.
Yeah.
But that's another, I would add that to the list too. If people are skimming on taking care of themselves from sleeping to eating, and then you find not weird, but cuts and bruises and things on them that are not normal.
Yeah.
So
Megan, by the time they get to you, it's obviously there's still so much hope, because that's what you do. You pull them back from the edge. But by the time they get to you, a lot of times they're past a point, a threshold where things could have been headed off a long time ago. But once they start getting to you and opening up, how do you help them begin to process through some of those things? And then how do you help them see signs so that they don't continue to regress back into the darkness, back into the isolation and the siloing?
Yeah. Well, first I wave my magic wand, and then they're good.
There you go. Okay. End of stream. Yeah. Magic wand. Go see Megan.
No, I say that because a lot of it is things I do, but a lot of it is on the person and their willingness to accept and receive help. And so I would say the first thing that I want to try and do is listen to someone. And kind of like Brandon said, I want to ask them some pretty pointed questions. And I'm going to ask them some pretty direct questions. I'm going to ask someone, typically when I'm meeting with them for the first time, some general just health and wellness questions. What is your sleep? What is your eating habits? Are you getting any sort of movement or exercise in your day? Who is in your support system? I'm going to ask students if they're having thoughts of hurting themselves, or if they are hurting themselves, or if they're having thoughts of ending their life. If they're having thoughts of hurting other people, what are those fluctuations in their mood? Are they isolating? Are they more irritable? Are they having difficulty concentrating? So I'm going to do just a general kind of assessment to get a sense of where they're at. And I think you asked me, what sort of do I do to sort of help pull them back in? I really want to get at what their goals are. What do they think they need to work on? What do they think is going to be helpful for them? And a lot of people, I will admit, kind of just say, I want to feel better.
Yeah.
Or they're coming in saying, I don't feel like myself. I don't really know how else to describe it other than I just am off and this isn't who I am. And so from there, we kind of set some tangible goals. Okay, well, how would you know you're feeling better? Like, give me some targets that we can reach. And then we'll start to kind of get a game plan from that. I wanted to just say one thing about kind of the signs and symptoms. I wanted to speak to anxiety just a little bit because I think that's one that honestly is really hard to notice in other people. Our friends and colleagues and partners who have anxiety, a lot of them are really good at hiding it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for them, they don't think they're hiding it. And two, it's such an internal process. So oftentimes they're physiologically alert or on edge. Their heart's racing, their stomach's churning. Also, some other signs, if you can't rest, like if you can't just be, if you always have to be busy all the time, that's a good sign that you're struggling with something. Because a lot of times students will tell me, well, I stay busy because as soon as I get alone, my mind starts racing. I start questioning everything I'm doing. I start thinking about everything that I said. So I think just to speak on some of those signs for anxiety, because honestly, I feel like that's one that's sometimes hard to pick up on. And if folks aren't having a full-on panic attack in front of you, you may never really know that struggle of anxiety.
Absolutely. Man, that's powerful. And I hope that if you're watching, you picked up on some of those cues, some of those symptoms, those things that they kind of tip their hand and let you know maybe personally that something is off. And Megan said it. She's like, people are just like, I just know I'm not myself. And if that's you, we want to encourage you to talk to somebody, like open up. And if you're watching and you have questions for the panel, go ahead, drop them in the comments below, and we'll do our best to answer those here in a few minutes. But as we talked about these different symptoms, like that stuff happens normal life, right? Like that's just the stress of being human. That's the stress of being a student, working a job, roommate situations, whatever. And then you compound it with the reality that we're all currently walking through the quarantine or the shelter in place or the social distancing or the isolation. Like, what would you say, or how would you speak into people now? They're like, okay, like I feel like something's off, but I can't even go right now and schedule an appointment to go talk to somebody or seek professional help. So what would you say to those people and how they can start the process, or what they could do now in this current situation of, hey, you kind of need to keep your hands to yourself?
Well, I want to jump in real quick and just mention that as much as I believe in my profession and my field, I also want to encourage people to just talk to one another and to connect and to think of those people that you trust. Think of those people who you can rely on, who you know can kind of hold information and not tell the whole world, and consider opening up to them, because I think connection and talking about it, you will be amazed at how many students will come see me one time and they reach out after that one visit and they said, just saying it out loud to another person has given me the courage to tell my mom or to tell my boyfriend or to, tell my best friend. And that alone, I think, as scary as it can be, just having that courage to share your story with someone, and with someone you trust. I think that's key. And we don't need to blast it out to everyone, in our group me, but thinking about who's someone that I can really rely on that might be able to hear me.
Yeah, absolutely. BK, for you, what did that look like for you to start opening up? Was that, did it start with some professional help? Did it start with a roommate or a friend? Like, how did you begin to open up and tell your story?
So I actually had horrible roommates at the time that
helps.
They didn't even talk to me when I walked in the door. Like, it was, I was just non-existent to them, which, hindsight, I don't think that they knew what they were doing, but that was compounded for me.
Yeah.
That was like, I really, not even at home am I wanted here, you know? So whenever all that started and I started hurting myself and all that, I actually reached out to my mom about a day after the first time that I did it. And I called her and I was like, something's really wrong. Obviously, I had never done anything like that before. I'd never cut myself before, nothing like that. And so I called her, I sent her a picture of it because I think she thought that I was just sad, you know? And that's a Southern mom right there for you. Like, no, you're fine. It's okay. Let's just talk it out. That kind of thing. I was like, no, look at it. Something is wrong. And I'm not going to get emotional, guys. So my dad and my mom, actually, they're divorced, and they drove down here to College Station. As soon as I got off the phone with her, she actually called him, and they both made arrangements to come down here, and they helped move me out of my apartment that I was in because my roommates were just awful. And I actually moved in with Kayla, who, she was a huge blessing at that time of my life. She actually had, like, randomly just had a spare bedroom at her condo, and she was like, we want to open that room up to you. So had she not done that, I wouldn't have had the support system that I have now, because Blake Lewis, who plays keys and music director, all that, Blake and Kayla were my two main people at that time, because they knew that I was hurting myself, and they were very gentle and caring. And anytime anything would happen, even whenever I would make really stupid decisions, and on top of hurting myself, even all that stuff, they were always like, let's talk it out and figure out what happened and why you got to that point. It was never like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that again. You know, It was very gentle and kind. And for me, that was kind of my segue into opening up to more people. And after I told my parents, they took me straight to student services, and I had the crisis counseling done. And that was huge. So that started me off onto, they actually gave me a number to my current therapist. And I've had her for 2.5 years now, and it has completely changed my life. So I think that it just takes one kind person to get you started, you know, to kind of get the ball rolling and be like, you're safe to talk about this with us, you know? Yeah,
definitely.
So.
Okay, Brandon and Megan, I want to hear from you on this as well, but are there obvious external differences for anxiety and depression, and are they handled differently?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say Megan probably can probably speak to this better than I can, but everybody's experience and their circumstances play into it so differently. And I think there's no, one filter that we pass everything through. There's no book we pull off the shelf. There's no, website that we triage them with that, is able to solve all of these, conversations. It looks different for different people. And I think Megan mentioned this before in a really perfect way. A lot of people cover anxiety and depression with humor and positivity and this ability to kind of go above and beyond and do all these things. At A&M, we have so many students who are hyper involved, and many times they're involved because it makes them feel like they have purpose. Otherwise, if they don't have those things that they can tie themselves to, they don't have a purpose. Wow. And I think that's a really big struggle, for many of the students that we see on a daily basis. And so, yes, I think absolutely anxiety, depression, stress, coping with homesickness, suicidal ideation, all of these things can kind of manifest themselves in different ways. And I think that's where, we as people who are here to support as the church, we have to be mindful of it, not always having the one size fits all approach. Looking for programs and services and scripture and prayers that are specific to talk into people's lives, no matter where they're at and what they're walking through, becomes so vitally important. If we ever get stale or stagnant, then now we're no longer serving the needs of those students who are out there who really desperately need us. And I think that's, one of the things, to kind of jump back to that previous question. Whenever we're thinking about, I have these feelings, what should I do? For me, it's always three things: seek God, seek help, and seek some order or structure in your life.
That's good.
If we're passing it through the filter of our faith, Jesus tells us in John 14 that, when he left this world, that he gave us peace. He gave us shalom, the opportunity to have perfect peace through the Holy Spirit being here. That's an opportunity that we as Christians have to be able to connect to all the time. But he also gave us community. He gave us the church. And so many of the people like Megan, who are counselors in our church here, are specially trained to be able to recognize and support people who are struggling through, and to give them techniques. So seeking order means, what does that structure look like for how do I cope? How do I recognize warning signs? How do I become a little bit more mindful to check in with certain people, and to go to the doctor, and to eat better, and to get sleep? And so I think each one of those pieces, it really becomes so important for us to recognize how we speak into the lives of those that we're serving.
So good. Megan, I want you to jump in on that and just talk about, for kind of self-diagnosis, but also noticing in other people. And we're going to kind of transition and talk about how we speak into this in our friends' lives in a second. But anxiety, depression, stress, do they present themselves similarly? And if so, is there a different approach in how we should even be processing it ourselves, like internally?
Yeah, what's cool is that well, I don't know if this is cool, but what Brandon said, it does present differently for different folks. So I know for myself, I actually had a period of time where I fell off and kind of felt in a funk. And what I noticed is that I was more irritable, and just my I think that numbness that you mentioned, BK, and it's sort of not enjoying things, right? And so I think sometimes it can be hard to really pinpoint, is this anxiety? Is this depression? Is it both? And that's what I was going to point out, is that from what I can tell, most college students now, they're sort of experiencing a combination of both, because it's a cycle that it kind of perpetuates itself. So maybe I'm feeling stressed or nervous about academics or fitting in or meeting a group of people. And again, what Brandon said, sort of that identity is tied to their grades, right, or what organization they're in, or who they're friends with, or who they're dating, or who they're not dating. And so when those expectations or those kind of external identifiers aren't met, then there's this letdown, right? And there's this sense of isolation, depression, questioning our worth and our value, which then sort of makes that next time that we're faced with a big project, a big test, an interview, socializing with people, that anxiety ramps back up. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, they're really connected. We know that there's a lot of overlap in the physiological, right? But I would say one of the things that is maybe abnormal for people, and I don't want to totally put words in people's mouth, but if you're obsessively or overthinking things all of the time, whether that's your future, or your past, that's a pretty good sign that something's a little off. Now, I'm not saying thinking and preparing for what's next, or reflecting on past experiences in order to grow and become a better person are bad or wrong. Yeah. But if you can't turn that off, if you can't sort of redirect those thoughts or quiet your mind, that may be kind of one of those early warning signs that that there's some anxiety or depression.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Going on.
That's really interesting. And so, to all of you, you talked about quieting your mind. Brandon, just a second ago, you talked about peace, like God offers us peace. I love in Philippians 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it's talking about how, like, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything with prayer and thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and then he will give you his peace. Right. And I'll just be honest. And this question was actually just asked a minute ago on our Facebook feed. It's easy, and they didn't say this part, but it's easy in some respects for us to sit here and talk about this and give out these answers. And it's like, yeah, you were trained to say that. And Chris, you're a pastor. You're supposed to say that. Like, it's easy for us to process through that. And again, in some respects, I deal with depression. I deal with anxiety. I deal with stress. I know that all of you do as well. Just because, BK, you've gone to a counselor doesn't mean that everything's just magically better. Like, you have to be very intentional about taking care of yourself and processing through those things. But it's, in some ways, it's easy for us to say those things. What would you say to someone who feels like that's not where they are? And yes, I hear you saying God offers me peace, but I'm not sure that I feel that right now. I'm not sure that God is paying attention to me, and I find myself in a dark place and maybe even feel like God has in some ways removed himself from me. What would you say, BK, what would you say to that person? I'm sure you had some of those thoughts, especially in the deepest, darkest moments as you were walking through things. Like, what did other people say to you? Or what helped you begin to know that God was with you no matter what, even though sometimes it didn't necessarily feel like that was true?
So I don't think that, I mean, yes, people always told me God's with you and you are so special and like all these things. But I think for me, the biggest part that kind of shifted my mindset was my therapist had me write down people in my life that would be heartbroken if I was gone. So obviously my parents, my brother, who's 14 now. Oh my God, he's so big. But he's like my little baby. But kind of that shifting that focus to make you look at how would that affect other people's lives if you weren't here anymore, and you add value. Like, so that kind of shifted my mindset and made me think, okay, maybe if they would be sad, then maybe that means that I should be here and I have things to offer and things like that. So for me, once she asked that, that's kind of what helped me refocus and gain perspective on the entire situation.
That's good.
Even at my absolute worst. I mean, they brought that up in the crisis counseling. The guy told me, write down the top 3 people that would be most affected if something happened to you. And for me, I'm obviously bawling because I'm in crisis counseling and like things are not great. But that was a very, very dark moment. And even in that time, focusing on those 3 people was huge. That was something that I think I don't know, Megan, if you guys ask that often, but I think that should be something that is asked, especially for someone who's saying, I don't care anymore, and I don't want to be here anymore, and all of that. So, that was huge for me.
Yeah, that's so powerful. That's so powerful. And speaking of Philippians 4:8 says this, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing, fix your thoughts on what is true. And it goes on to talk about other attributes, but I think that it's so important, and this speaks exactly what you were just talking about, BK. Like, what is the truth? Because my mind is going 1,000 miles an hour, and it's telling me all of these things, and it's convincing me that I'm alone, and that I'm walking by myself, and that no one else cares. But what is the truth? And when you have to take a second and write down the names of people that would be affected if you weren't here anymore, all of a sudden it brings some perspective and it refocuses you on what is actually true, right? And so while we're talking about this suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideations, Brandon, you said that earlier, man, what do I do? If this is me, if it's something I've thought about, when do I seek help? Should I immediately seek help? Like, what does that look like on a personal level? And again, we're going to talk about our friends in just a second, but if I am watching this tonight and I have been processing that, or I've been thinking about that. At what point should I be alarmed and speak up? Brandon, why don't you start?
Sure. So I think the moment that, kind of harkening back to what we talked about before, the moment that you start seeing some of those warning signs is the moment that you start asking those specific questions. And I know Megan, mentioned when she was talking a little bit about her intake process that she's asking, have you thought about, hurting yourself? Have you thought about, what it would look like for you to go through with this plan or this procedure that you have in your mind? I think if we start seeing some of those initial warning signs, that's the time for us to be able to act. And I think about it with an analogy. I love analogies, and the best one that I can come up with in this circumstance is just like when you're driving your car and you have that dashboard and there's all the warning lights that are there. You may have your low tire light. It was cold yesterday, no big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, right? You know it's going to get warmer in a couple of days. It's something that you acknowledge, you look at, but you know what that may change. But you still pay attention. But if you're driving your car on, more than likely you're going to get stranded somewhere. And I think that's the piece that we have to be mindful of. We don't want people to be stranded without help, without support, without care. And I think that's something that, I have to do myself, even in my own life, as someone who is frequently, assisting others and helping others and that sort of thing. I also have to check myself and say, am I in a good place? And I think role modeling, what that looks like for me to go and get counseling support, or for me to go and talk to my small group about what I'm struggling with, or for me to reach out and call some of my friends or family members and say, I'm not doing well with this, or I don't feel like I'm doing well with this. Can you pray for me? And many times I know people say, I'm praying for you, and it seems very insignificant, but prayer is help. That is a way for you to meaningfully speak into somebody's life and to make sure that not only are you listening to what they have to say, but now you're using prayer to intercede on behalf of them to God to provide them with that support and that encouragement as well.
So good. Okay, so Megan, someone is feeling this. They're having these thoughts. They're really, they maybe even been planning or thinking about like no one will care or whatever. Like, what would you say to that person like right now who's sitting here watching this?
Talk to someone, tell someone, even if you can't say it verbally out loud, text it to them. But please talk to someone, especially if you begin to think of a plan, you've been thinking about how you would do that. Even if you're doing things to get things in order, we really know that those are pretty strong warning signs that someone could attempt. I think sometimes when I talk to students, they'll say, I admit I do occasionally think about what would it be like if I weren't here anymore. But then they immediately rebuttal that with, and then I realize, oh my gosh, my brother, or, whatnot. For a lot of people, it's their pet. It's their, it's their student board that they're the, treasurer for. And that's okay. That sense of connection and need is, I think, something that keeps a lot of us going and motivated. But truly, when you're stuck in that place and you're really not able to come up with the why you would keep going, or you're starting to kind of believe that lie that people don't care. That's a scary place, and we want people to get connected and get supported. And so validating though that can be a real place for people. And you sort of mentioned if someone is feeling that right now, I would say to them, it's okay. And it's okay to acknowledge that's where you're at. But acknowledge it and then share that with someone.
Yeah, that's huge. Okay, so if we think about that from the other side of the equation, what happens if I'm the person that gets that text or that phone call, or they sit me down, I'm back home and I'm a parent, or I'm an older sibling or a younger sibling or a best friend or whatever, all of a sudden someone sits me down and they start talking about anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts. And I'm like, man, I'm not trained. I haven't gone through this gatekeeper training. I didn't go to school for this. Like, I can tell somebody I'll pray for them, but what in the world am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to do? Like, what do we do? What do we do, Brandon?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with listening, Chris. I think the most important thing that you can do is if someone's reaching out, you have to clear your schedule a little bit, and you have to make sure that the importance is placed on that person being able to share their story. And really not for you to interject in that moment, but to truly let them unfold that on their own terms, giving them some power in that situation to say, this is where I'm at and this is where I'm struggling. And, I've come to you because you're someone who's important to me and I can really confide in you. And so I think it starts with listening. And then I think the second part of it too is kind of a bittersweet thing, but making sure that you recognize that you're not the savior of their problems.
That's good.
You can't take this away from them. You can't solve the problem for them. I think many times we all have big hearts, and that looks like us trying to drop everything all the time, when many times these people need professional help. They need to go talk to Megan. They need to go and call helpline. They need to be mindful of, some of the resources that are in community. And that means you walking with them.
Yeah.
You taking them to that place and saying, I recognize that I have limitations and that there are things that I can't talk you through, but I'm not going to leave you alone. I care enough to be able to walk you to this resource and make sure that I'm here to help you process this.
Yeah.
And I think, just being there, listening and doing that has a huge impact on those people.
That's huge. Okay, BK, I would imagine that sometimes the easiest thing to do is just to commiserate with someone, be like, oh, I know how you feel, like I've been there. So how do you find the balance in like relating with someone and actually being helpful to someone who is feeling this weight, or they're carrying this burden?
I mean, I've kind of had some experience with friends coming to me because I am vocal about what I've been through. And whenever they come to me, I try and not tell my story while they're telling theirs. You know what I mean? So kind of that balance of tell me everything, and I'm not going to, and this is actually something that Kayla taught me, don't look surprised. Whenever they say things that they're expecting you to be judgmental of, just kind of take it and be a neutral position for a second so that they can have someone that they're just able to, I'm just going to unload on you. And because sometimes people need to do that. Sometimes they need to get all their thoughts that they think are crazy out and kind of get that, they need you to be that person that is just sitting there willing to listen. And just like Brandon said, like, I think that's all I needed at the beginning. I think that if I had someone do that for me a long time ago before I started doing all this, I think it would have looked completely different.
Yeah, that's huge. That's so good. Okay, Megan, so when do I know, hey, this is urgent, that I need to take them, like Brandon said, walk with them or whatever, take this next step? How do I know the difference between that? Because probably if somebody comes to me, I'm freaking out on the inside, right? And I'm trying to do what BK said, and I'm trying to be neutral and not freak out on my face, but I'm freaking out on the inside. How do we temper that and know when, okay, you need to, this is immediate, you need to take them now, versus like, hey, it's okay, yes, they need help, but this isn't like a call 911 thing or whatever. Like, where do we find the balance in that?
Yeah, so you want to just validate for everyone, it's okay to feel nervous and it's okay to be freaking out. I'm not going to lie, my heart rate is racing a little bit right now. Because I think this topic is one that just brings up a lot of emotion for people. And so the urgency piece, I think can be tricky, but I guess my main rule of thumb is sort of err on the side of caution. And if someone says, well, I had this thought one time this morning.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you just be a good friend and be a good mentor and be a good advocate for them, and you check in with them, you listen to them, like Pastor Will talked about this morning, you pay attention to them, and maybe that's going to suffice for the moment. But again, I think if someone is coming to you and they're saying this has been going on for some time, this is a thought that lingers a long time. It doesn't go away quickly, like we said, with just some of that reminders of, okay, there are people that care about me, whatnot. That would, to me, rise to the level. Let's get them talking to someone. Maybe just getting them scheduled for an appointment in the next few days would be sufficient. But again, if you're unsure, err on the side of caution, right? And I think you can say to that person, gosh, I'm not really sure how to help you right now. And it's okay to say that. It's okay to tell someone, you're not sure how to help or what to say or what to do. And then I think you can, like I said, kind of walk with them through that next step. You could even call with them to a hotline, or to, most places will, at least for us on campus, we do provide consultation. So you could just sort of call and do like hey, I have a friend who's thinking this, what should I do? Kind of thing. So I think when you sort of mentioned that, call 911, right? If someone tells you, hey, I've done something to attempt to end my life, right? That's an immediate 911 call. I think even to sort of back that up a little bit, if someone's telling you their plan, or telling you, well, I just need to get through this exam, or I just need to get through this, midterm, that they're giving some maybe nonverbal or some verbal, indirect verbal cues that they're maybe they kind of set a time in their mind.
Right.
That might be, again, a sense where you're saying, let's go do the crisis counseling. Let's go actually talk to someone today.
Yeah.
Let's not put this off.
Yeah, that's huge. We couldn't begin to talk about all of the mental health struggles that exist, right? There's so many labels. Every person's story is different. Every person's situation is different. I know we've talked some about anxiety and depression and suicidal thoughts, but what about like something like bipolar? If you have someone that's bipolar in your life, like how do you help them? How do you deal with them? Because like I have not personally ever dealt with that, but I've seen it from a distance, and it's tough, right? And so how do you help someone, not necessarily fix them? It's not about that, right? Because that's not our job, and you said that earlier. But how do we walk with somebody maybe that is either showing signs of bipolar, or we know that they're bipolar? What does that look like?
Do you want me to jump on that one?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I'll be honest with you. Bipolar disorder is tricky. And I'm not even going to really necessarily pick up on that in the first handful of times meeting with someone, because a lot of times those shifts in mood happen, kind of outside of the window of when I might see someone. I think the first thing to note is that just because someone's happy one minute and sad the next minute, that does not mean they're bipolar. That's a pretty kind of bad definition of that. One of the things that I understand the most about bipolar disorder is that there's this sense of mania or hypomania that people have to go into to sort of meet that criteria. And a lot of times that's sort of hard to pinpoint, because it may look like someone who's just really taking a lot of risks, but their sense of kind of this sense of invincibility, so maybe they're engaging in a lot of risky behavior that oftentimes is associated with bipolar disorder. And that may not look all that risky, but if someone's spending thousands of dollars online shopping, that's one of those kind of behaviors that can fall into that category. So in order to support someone, I think if they've already received a diagnosis of that and they're on medication, encourage them to take their meds. And if they're feeling like their medications aren't working, or they're not feeling like they are working as well as they used to, they need to go back and see their doctor and talk to them. And just having a structure and routine is going to be very, very helpful. The sleep is going to be a really critical piece. as well as, diet and exercise. So that's my kind of brief understanding of that. I wish I could speak a little bit more to that, but yeah.
Sorry about that. I had myself muted. Okay, so as we begin to transition and we're wrapping things up for tonight, what are some preventative things? Like there have to be steps we can take or we can walk with other people. What if we are in this place where we're having days where we just feel blah, or we know that we have toxic people in our life? Like, what are some preventative things we can do to head this off before it goes too far and we find ourselves in this place that we don't want to be? Brandon, you want to start?
Sure. So actually on campus at A&M, I have the opportunity to serve in a committee capacity with Megan, specifically on well-being for our division staff members. And so I think one of the really interesting things that we've learned over the course of that time is that there are actually 5 elements to well-being. There's career, social, financial, physical, and community well-being. And this has been something that's been put together by Gallup back in 2014. The folks that you always hear, the Gallup poll has solicited all these people, but they were actually able to measure almost 1 million people on this particular topic of well-being and kind of taking care of yourself, and only 7% of that population believe that they were thriving in all 5 areas of that well-being. And so specifically, I think one of the things that a lot of times we do is we bargain with ourselves, and those short-term things become more important or stand in the way of our long-term growth. So you tell yourself, you know what, I'm just going to cheat on this one meal. I'm in my house. I'm already struggling to find happiness and joy. I've got kids running around. I got dogs barking. I got a spouse who's telling me, that I need to go outside, whatever it is. And you're like, you know what? Now's the time for a snack, right? But in reality, that's something that's holding you back. Or, you know what? The gym's closed. So if I don't go for a walk in my neighborhood today, am I going to have a heart attack tomorrow? Probably not, right? So I can bargain with myself so many times on some of those short-term aspects of well-being. But I think the one thing that I would always caution people on is to be mindful of what do you want to do and where do you see yourself going in the long term. And I think specifically for us as Christians, that looks like making faith a big priority for us. And so each one of those 5 elements of well-being pass through the filter of what does that mean for us as Christians, and what did God say about this? What did Christ show us in the example of how he worked with his disciples and led them and taught them and performed those miracles? And I think each one of those elements of well-being can be really critical. And I would say do a daily check or do a weekly check or a monthly check to see, am I where I want to be in my finances or with my community or with my family or in my health? So that way you have the opportunity to kind of really check up on yourself.
Yeah. What have been some things, BK, for you that have helped you process, helped you be healthy, to maintain that health when you see things kind of popping back up? What have been some things for you?
So I actually got a dog in September of last year, and that's been a huge thing for me because even whenever I feel like I don't want to do anything, I still have to take her out, and I still have to walk her because I'm on a 3rd story of an apartment building. So I have to go downstairs and walk her around and make sure she goes to the bathroom and all that stuff. So for me, it's getting outside. I need sunshine. I need to be outdoors, that kind of thing. And it's been really tough with the gyms being closed because I was kind of on a roll a little bit, getting my health back in order and all that stuff. That super sucks that we can't go to the gym. I hate that. But I've been starting to make at-home workouts and stuff. So if y'all need anything, just let me know. But for me, it's just talking to people, even if it's just texting or calling. I call my mom all the time. Yeah. I feel like I'm the neediest child in the world right now. What are you doing, Mom? And getting outside and reading has actually been a huge thing for me right now. And not reading for betterment, reading for fun. Yeah. Like reading a book that I think, oh my gosh, I bet that it's like TV in a book, that kind of thing. So,
yeah.
But yeah, that's preventative for me. I need to just not necessarily stay moving, but not stay in my house with the curtains drawn and watching The Office for endless hours,
Right,
you know, as happy as that show makes me. So.
Okay, Megan, what would you say? What are some preventative things or some like check mark things that people can continue to do to stay in a healthy place? Like, I know that there's definitely a connection with our mental health and our physical health, how we're eating, if we're getting enough sleep. So what are some of those things that you would say, hey, when you're starting to feel this, when you're starting to focus, like obsess on certain things, or you're thinking too much about the past or the future, or you realize you're not getting enough sleep, what are some things that you would speak into and say, hey, you need to like write these things down. These are things that are proven, that are check marks for you to help with preventative and kind of self-aware.
Yeah, I think we've all mentioned sleep, but I just want to emphasize that if you're sleep deprived, you are more prone to depression and anxiety. It's just part of our makeup, right? Honestly, if we kind of want to spiritualize it, God designed us to need sleep. And there's a lot of things that happen in our body, in our brains when we're sleeping. And so when we're not allowing ourselves to get that, it's going to impact how we feel and how we react to things. So if you're not already getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep at night at a pretty consistent time, you know, going to bed and waking up around the same time every day, I encourage you to do that and do it in small chunks, right? If you're, you know, wanting to get to bed 3 hours earlier than when you're normally going to bed, we'll just do 1 hour earlier, maybe 1 hour earlier over 1 week, and then kind of spread that out.
Yeah.
So that one, I think I want to emphasize. I don't know why sleep deprivation is cool, but apparently in college it is. So I encourage students to sort of support one another, right? Like, don't schedule hangouts start at midnight. Like, it's just not, it's not good. I'm also, well, let's not get into that. I was gonna say I'm also in my 30s and, you know, like to
mother
go to
of
bed
4 and all that. Yeah.
So sleep. The other thing I was going to mention is if you don't already do some sort of mindfulness, meditation, and I'm not necessarily meaning like where you sit on the floor and you like om. I think our spiritual practices of prayer and sitting and being still and being quiet before the Lord can tap into those benefits of mindfulness. Basically what you're doing is you're retraining your brain, and you're building those neurons in your brain to sort of allow that quietness to sort of slow down those racing thoughts. And so practicing mindfulness where you're literally just focusing on the here and the now.
Yeah.
A really like simple trick for that is to focus on your senses. So what do you see? What can you hear? What can you smell? What can you taste? And what can you touch? And so if you're in a space where you can kind of quiet your mind and then go through that exercise, you know, take a couple minutes and just really observe your surroundings. And I mean, it's as literal as like, oh, there's a blue chair. Oh, there's a gray pillow. Like, it might seem very childlike, but honestly, I think sometimes that's what we need, is to sort of go back before the busyness and the noise of things and just observe. Sit outside and do it and listen. I don't know about y'all, but I'm like, these birds outside are so loud and they're chirping. I mean, I've just been way more aware of nature these past 3 weeks now when I step outside. So sleep, mindfulness, and then just, again, going back to sort of like, what is that self-talk? What are you saying to yourself? And I just want to acknowledge that almost everyone I talk to in counseling at some point in time tells me, I'm way harder on myself than I would ever be to anyone else.
Absolutely.
And when people start to tell me some of the things that they say to themselves, it's heartbreaking, because first off, we would never tell anyone else those things. And second off, where do you think that's going to leave your mind if you are constantly criticizing and speaking down to yourself. And that's where I think those practices of what you might call affirmations, and I'm not saying, to say in front of the mirror and say, like, I'm the prettiest, most amazing, most talented person ever. But thinking of things that are true about yourself, and you start those affirmations by saying, I am blank. And you can put in an emotion, like, I am proud of, my hard work, or I'm kind of drawing a blank here. You can have affirmations that are about your physical appearance, about your character, about accomplishments. But again, we want to also acknowledge, like, maybe part of those affirmations are, I am a child of God. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I am redeemed, right? And I have new life because of Christ. So your affirmations don't have to be void of those truths of God. So those are, I think, my main things that you can do kind of in that daily practice to help your mental health.
So good. I love that you ended it with the fact that this is full of affirmations. And because as you were talking, I'm thinking, this sounds great, but there are so many days, even for myself, where I don't see those things about myself. Like if you said, hey, what are some things that you're good at or you're proud of? And I'm like, I don't know that I could tell you, because I am my own worst critic, and I do talk down to myself, and I do beat myself up and get in this negative cycle. But what is true? What is true is what God says about us, and that does not change. And so if you are struggling to think of things that are good, or to think of things that you feel like are admirable about you, look at what God has to say about who you are, and that he loves you, and that he cares about you, and that he offers you peace, and that he does call you redeemed and forgiven and saved, and you are a child of the King, and you have so much value. And so on those days where you can't see that when you look in the mirror, or if you sit down with a piece of paper, nothing good comes out when you start putting labels on yourself, think about what God has to say about who you are as he speaks into your reality. And this has been so good. Thank you all so much. I do have one final question. And this is kind of a two-part question. So like today, right now, if I am not in College Station and I am in self-isolation or whatever, what are some resources? What are some things, if I need to talk to somebody, what are some resources today? And then I also want us to talk about some more practical resources when we are all back in Aggie land, and some things that A&M offers, et cetera. But thinking specifically now today, what are some resources, Brandon, that you know of? And then Megan, will jump to you, and then BK, I want to hear some resources of what you did and who you got help from. So, but Brandon, to get us started, resources today.
Absolutely. Well, not to be a PSA for campus, but we have lots of resources for our students at Texas A&M, and I think one of the ones that's really profound is our helpline that's available for students, which is available 24 hours a day for people to call in, even if they just need someone to talk to. I think we've kind of made mention of that several times this evening. There is no kind of push that is too minimal or too small. It's really there as something that we can definitely utilize. Obviously, counseling and psychological services, which is Megan's department on campus at Texas A&M, so I'm not going to say too much about it. I'll let her talk about it. Is a great resource. They do lots of training, so even if you're not necessarily who's someone, you're feeling that right now, you're feeling that depression or anxiety, but you know someone who is, they're a great resource to be able to reach out and provide you some tips and tricks for that. And even more specifically to our church, So not to selfishly plug my wife, but to plug her, and Dawson and the Care Network folks that are at Brazos Fellowship. They have some fantastic collaborations with the community, in which they're able to take people's circumstances and challenges and work through and provide some really amazing solutions in light and dark situations for those folks that are there. And so if there's something that you're dealing with or coping with and you're struggling, please reach out to Care Network. We are right here for you. Everybody at the church wants to be able to support you and care for you. And even though we're all working remotely, those services are still available to you to reach out and take advantage of at any time.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you talked about Care Network, and you can find that information if you go to brazosfellowship.com and then you scroll down to kind of the online offerings. There's a place that's just talking about all of the online ministry opportunities. If you click on that and scroll all the way to the bottom, there's an orange banner that says Care Network, has a list of all of the different resources that we offer through Brazos Fellowship, the partnerships we have in the community. And then Brandon, you mentioned the hotline at A&M. Is that like do you know it off the top of your head? Is it an easy hotline to remember?
Yeah, so actually, if you take your student ID card and you flip it around on the back, it's one of those useful numbers that's back there. So things like Carpool obviously is another great resource for students that they may use, but that number for helpline is published right on the back of your student ID card on campus. So that's a really good one. We've got some awareness months, as well, where we've plastered the bright pink signs that say helpline all over campus. So if you're ever lost in a sea of white papers on bulletin boards, the bright pink will stand out. It'll be there for you with that information as well.
Man, too soon, Brandon. We can't see those bright pink things right now because we can't be on campus. That's just not
That's
fair.
True.
Yeah,
that's true.
Okay, Megan.
When you come back.
Yeah, exactly. When we come back. So Megan, specifically talking about counseling services and what's offered now while they're remote. What do you offer?
Yeah, so let me say one thing about Helpline real quick. They operate 24 hours on weekends. So during the week, they're open 4 p.m. to 8 a.m. So they're basically our after hours kind of call line. And so we're super excited that they got to stay open during this time. And the number is 979-845-2700. So in terms of CAPS, or Counseling and Psychological Services, we are also providing services remotely. And so that is teletherapy. So if someone is wanting to schedule a initial phone consultation, they can go to the website caps.tamu.edu, and there should be a pretty clear button somewhere along there that says make an appointment. And so they can select an appointment time that works for their schedule. So again, this is going to be over the phone. I imagine that would take anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, depending on kind of the nature of what the person's calling about.
Yeah.
And then after that first call, there will be some recommendations made based on what's presented. So that is a service that's available to Texas A&M students who are currently enrolled. Because of ethical and legal obligations for our licenses, students would need to be in Texas in order to receive teletherapy, but they could call and at least get some references for maybe their state or wherever they're at. So don't count us out completely.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, we're able to provide video and phone therapy if that's what the recommendation is going to be. At this time, we're sort of in a tricky spot because we have about a month left of classes. And so not to discourage people, but what we maybe provide is going to be a little bit more limited in scope. So just thinking ahead, if you are going to be at home over the summer, it may be worth investing in finding someone locally in your own hometown who eventually could transition back to that in-person therapy. But I know for us, we want to be available for students, and we want Aggies in particular to know that we're supporting them. I will just mention quickly, Blinn also does provide counseling as well, and I believe they're also set up to do some teletherapy. So if you're a Blinn student, please reach out to their counseling and department. So Blinn students have that resource as well.
That's awesome. I know even at Brazos Fellowship, Samantha Johnson is a part of the counseling program over at Blinn, and so we have some connections there as well. And so if you are a Blinn student or an A&M student and you missed some of what they just said, or you are looking for ways to get help and get connected, you can reach out to us at Brazos Fellowship or at 242. You can reach out to me, and I'd be more than happy to point you in the right direction. BK, for you, I know that you went and had crisis counseling at A&M, and then you now are seeing it continued over the past couple of years to see a counselor. Was that, I'm guessing that was a private practice counselor?
Yeah.
Great.
She has her own practice.
Okay.
But I know that she's not currently taking people right now, which is super unfortunate. But just because of all the craziness right now, she's not able to evaluate people and all that. But before I even got to her, the church is where I got a lot of my help from. So student services was the first thing. And then I didn't know if the Care Network was operating. So I'm glad to know that they're still doing stuff. I'm glad you mentioned that, Brandon, because I was going to ask about that without being like, hey, do you guys know if they're working? Before I shout them out, But Dawson was somebody that I talked to back then and stuff like that. So I think that that's an amazing resource, especially right now. I know how special our people are at the church, and I think that they have a lot of not just training, but life experience to guide people that are unsure where they're at and unsure where they need to go next. So that was huge for me, but also people can talk to me. I mean, I know that I'm not trained, but I can definitely listen and help you get to where you need to go if you need to talk to someone else. And I think that if I went through all of that just so I could be able to keep somebody else from going through it, or to be and walk through this with somebody else that's going through it, I'm glad I did.
Yeah. That's huge. I love that so much. I'm so glad that you said that, BK, and I know that that is true of Megan and Brandon and myself. If you feel like, man, I don't know who to talk to, I don't feel like I can go to my parents or a family or a friend, please reach out to someone, reach out to us, call one of these hotlines, flip over your student ID and call the helpline. Like, just talk to someone. Thank y'all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for being on this panel and sharing so much of your personal experience and so much wisdom with us. It's been absolutely incredible.
Yeah, this has been great.
We're happy to do it.
Absolutely. Thanks, y'all.
Very good. Well, thank you all for joining us. And there are just a couple of things I want to let you know about as we get ready to wrap up here. First of all, just thank you. Thank you for being a part of this. And I hope that you know, first and foremost, you are not alone. I know that it can feel like it, and especially now in this season, in our current reality, and what we are having to deal with and process, and the stress and everything that's just piled on top of us is the perfect storm for us to feel like no one cares and everyone else has something bigger to deal with or more that they need to process, and they don't care about or need to think about me. But you matter, and you are not alone. And so let the people around you walk with you. Let somebody in, share part of your story, tell them what's going on so that they can walk with you and you can get the help that you need. But it doesn't have to be, well, I'm not there, I'm not that bad. There are so many things that we can do, and I really want to draw you back if you're like, okay, yeah, from time to time, like I've had anxiety before, but I'm not really that stressed out right now, everything's good. There are so many things we can do preventatively to help us not get there. And I want to encourage you and challenge you with that. And if you're curious about what those are, go and look at Philippians 4:6-8, where he talks about us exchanging our anxiety for the peace that God offers us and thinking about what is true. Let God transform your mind by changing the way you think. And also in that process, get sleep. eat right, exercise, like do things, get outside. Don't just go in your room and close the door and draw the curtains and watch Tiger King, binge watch it on Netflix. It's okay to spend time on Netflix, but when that becomes like the thing that you are going back to time after time after time, it might be a sign that you need to open up and you need some help. We want to be that for you as well. We want to continue to go on this journey with you. And so please stay connected to us. You can find us, probably the easiest way you can find us is here on our Facebook page or YouTube page, or head over to our Instagram. It's at 242 College. You can shoot us a DM. You can connect with me and our leaders. And we are always around and always willing to talk. And we also are going to start a brand new devotional tomorrow morning. Every day, Monday through Saturday, we're going live on Instagram, and we're going through a devotional together. And this week, we're going to be going through a devotional about mental health and being mentally strong. And so that's going to start tomorrow morning. You can join with us on the YouVersion Bible app. If you'll go to our Instagram at 242 College, then you can click on the link in our bio, and it'll take you directly to the devotional. You can join in and go through it with us. There will be people in there that are having conversation and sharing what it's means to them. And then every day at 11 a.m., we're going live on our Instagram to talk about those devotionals. We've been doing it the last couple of weeks. It's been super powerful. I have no doubt this week will be powerful as well. We love you. We're glad that you're here, and we cannot wait to be back together again. And if you are in a place where you do feel like you're alone, and maybe you're like, Chris, honestly, I'm in a good place, but I just am missing community. I'm missing fellowship. I'm missing connection. Please reach out. We have community groups that are meeting together every single week on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays. And then there's people getting online on Zoom and hanging out, playing games and watching movies and all kinds of fun stuff. And we would love for you to be a part of that. So if you're interested in that, please reach out. We will see you next time. Now, next Sunday is Easter, and we want to encourage you, spend Easter with your family. So jump on at 10 a.m. on Facebook to catch our main service live stream. And we will not be meeting next Sunday night as 242, but we will be back on April 19th for another service. We'll have worship and teaching, and we hope that we talk to you between now and then. But if not, we will see you on April 19th back here on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we'll see you next.